Picture this, the late 1800s. The sun bleeds across the horizon, painting the vast Texas landscape in fiery hues. A seemingly endless expanse of rolling hills and prairies stretches before you, a land of untamed beauty and limitless potential. This is the Texas of the open range, a time when cattle roamed free, their lowing a constant soundtrack to the lives of those who lived and worked this land. For generations, ranching had been a way of life, a tradition woven into the very fabric of Texan identity. Cattlemen, rugged and independent, lived by a code of honor, their herds their livelihood, their lives intertwined with the rhythm of the seasons. The open range represented freedom, a boundless frontier where fences were anathema, a symbol of restriction in a land that felt infinite. Imagine the exhilaration of a vast herd, thousands strong, thundering across the plains. A breathtaking spectacle of raw power and natural abundance. This was a world where a man's wealth was measured not in dollars and cents, but in the size of his herd and the reach of his grazing land. It was a world where property lines were fluid, a world governed less by law and more by custom and the unspoken rules of the range. But this idyllic picture, this seemingly endless freedom, was about to be dramatically disrupted. The arrival of barbed wire, a seemingly simple invention, would spark a conflict that would forever alter the face of Texas and its ranching heritage. This is the story of the Texas fence-cutting wars, a clash of cultures, a fight for land, and a legacy that continues to resonate even today. The seemingly innocuous arrival of barbed wire in Texas marked a turning point, a technological shift that would irrevocably alter the landscape and the lives of its inhabitants. Before its introduction, the open range reigned supreme, a symbol of freedom and boundless opportunity. But this new invention, this deceptively simple creation of twisted wire and sharp barbs, threatened to unravel the very fabric of this traditional way of life. Imagine the initial skepticism, the hesitant acceptance as ranchers cautiously observed this newfangled contraption. Barbed wire, initially met with resistance and even ridicule, proved to be remarkably effective. Unlike traditional fences made of wood or stone, which were expensive and labor-intensive to construct and maintain, barbed wire offered a cost-effective and efficient way to enclose vast tracts of land. Its ease of installation, coupled with its formidable deterrent effect on stray cattle, made it increasingly popular among ranchers seeking to secure their land and protect their herds. This seemingly simple innovation rapidly transformed ranching practices, creating a ripple effect across the state. The ability to define and protect one's property with relative ease led to the enclosure of previously open grazing lands, fundamentally changing the dynamics of the ranching industry. The spread of barbed wire was not merely a technological advancement, it was a social and economic revolution. It allowed for more intensive grazing practices, leading to increased efficiency and profitability. But this efficiency came at a cost. The open range, once a symbol of freedom, began to shrink, replaced by a patchwork of fenced-in pastures. This shift dramatically altered the very nature of ranching in Texas, paving the way for the conflicts that would soon erupt. The seemingly simple strands of barbed wire became the battle lines in a war that would define the future of the Texas landscape. The era of the open range was drawing to a close, and with it, a way of life. The stage was set for the escalating tensions and violent clashes that would come to be known as the Texas fence-cutting wars. The arrival of barbed wire didn't just change the landscape of Texas, it fundamentally reshaped its economic and social structures. While initially embraced by ranchers of all sizes, its impact disproportionately benefited those with significant resources. The ability to cheaply and effectively fence large tracts of land gave wealthy ranchers a distinct advantage, allowing them to consolidate their holdings and expand their operations at an unprecedented rate. The open range, once a common resource, was increasingly privatized, transforming into a series of vast, fenced-in properties. This consolidation of land ownership created a stark contrast between the powerful, wealthy ranchers and the smaller, independent operators who had previously thrived on the open range. The cattle barons, as they came to be known, amassed enormous fortunes, their influence extending far beyond the ranching industry itself. Their growing power and control over land resources led to increased tensions and resentment among those who found themselves squeezed out of the system. The vast, fenced-in ranches were not just a physical manifestation of economic power, they became symbols of inequality, fueling the simmering discontent that would soon erupt into open conflict. The ability to enclose vast areas allowed for more controlled grazing, leading to increased efficiency and greater profits. But this efficiency came at the expense of smaller ranchers who relied on the open range for their livelihoods. Their traditional way of life was threatened, their access to grazing lands restricted, and their future uncertain. The contrast between the sprawling estates of the wealthy and the struggling small ranchers was a potent catalyst for the escalating tensions that would define the Texas fence-cutting wars. The barbed wire, once a symbol of progress, now represented a stark division between the haves and the have-nots, a potent symbol of the changing economic landscape of Texas. This shift in land ownership would become a central point of contention in the coming conflict, a fight for survival and for the very soul of the Texas ranching tradition. Imagine the life of a small rancher in the Texas of the late 1800s. Generations of family history were tied to the land, their livelihood dependent on the open range, a vast expanse where their herds could graze freely. They weren't wealthy cattle barons, they were the backbone of the ranching community, hard-working individuals who lived a simple life, their wealth measured in the size of their herd and the health of their animals. Their existence was intrinsically linked to the open range, a resource they shared with their neighbors, a system governed by unwritten rules and a shared understanding of communal use. The arrival of barbed wire, while initially appearing neutral, quickly became a harbinger of change, a direct threat to their way of life. As wealthy ranchers began fencing vast tracts of land, the small ranchers found their access to grazing lands severely restricted. Their herds, once free to roam, were now confined, their movements limited by the ever-expanding network of barbed wire. The open range, once a source of sustenance and freedom, was shrinking, replaced by a landscape divided by fences, a landscape that no longer felt like home. The economic consequences were devastating. The smaller ranchers, lacking the resources to purchase and fence their own land, found themselves increasingly marginalized, their livelihoods threatened by the very innovation that had enriched the wealthy. Their struggle wasn't simply about land, it was about survival, about preserving a way of life that had been passed down through generations. The fences weren't just physical barriers, they were symbols of dispossession, representing the growing inequality that was tearing apart the ranching community. Their plight would become a key element in the escalating tensions that would ignite the Texas fence-cutting wars. Their fight was not just a fight for land but for their very existence. The simmering tensions between large and small ranchers didn't remain simmering for long. The first acts of defiance were subtle, almost clandestine, a wire mysteriously cut here, a fence partially dismantled there. These initial incidents, often carried out under the cover of darkness, were acts of desperation fueled by economic hardship and a sense of injustice. They were a silent rebellion, a way for the smaller ranchers to reclaim access to the grazing lands that had been taken from them. These weren't acts of malicious vandalism, they were desperate measures taken by people fighting to protect their livelihoods. As these isolated incidents multiplied, however, they began to escalate, transforming from isolated acts of defiance into a more organized and widespread movement. The cutting of fences became a symbol of resistance, a collective act of protest against the growing inequality and the perceived injustice of the land enclosures. The initial acts, often carried out by individuals or small groups, evolved into larger-scale operations involving more people and greater coordination. This escalation marked a significant shift, transforming the conflict from a series of isolated incidents into a full-blown confrontation. The atmosphere became increasingly charged, a palpable tension hanging in the air. The wealthy ranchers, seeing their property and investments threatened, responded with anger and determination. They hired guards, increased patrols, and sought legal recourse, further inflaming the conflict. The early days of fence cutting were not just about the wire itself, they represented a fundamental clash of values, a battle over access to resources and the very definition of property rights in the vast expanse of the Texas landscape. The seemingly simple act of cutting a fence had become a potent symbol of resistance, a spark that ignited a conflict that would reshape the future of Texas ranching. The quiet desperation of the small ranchers had given way to a more assertive, even violent, resistance, setting the stage for the escalating conflict that would consume the state. What began as isolated acts of defiance quickly escalated into organized raids. No longer were fences being cut sporadically, coordinated groups of ranchers, fueled by resentment and desperation, targeted specific ranches, systematically dismantling miles of barbed wire. These weren't just individual acts of protest anymore, they were carefully planned operations, often involving dozens of participants, demonstrating a growing level of organization and coordination among the smaller ranchers. The raids became bolder, more brazen, and increasingly defiant. The message was clear, the small ranchers were not going to stand idly by while their livelihoods were destroyed. The wealthy landowners, meanwhile, were not taking this passively. They responded to the raids with force, hiring armed guards, forming posses, and even resorting to violent retaliation. The peaceful coexistence that once characterized the ranching community was shattered, replaced by a climate of fear and mistrust. The conflict escalated from disputes over property lines to open warfare, with both sides engaging in increasingly violent acts. The landscape of Texas, once dotted with herds of cattle, was now marked by the scars of conflict, the broken fences a stark reminder of the escalating tensions. The initial acts of desperation had transformed into a full-blown conflict, a war fought not with armies but with wire cutters and guns. The retaliatory actions taken by the landowners only served to further radicalize the fence cutters, creating a vicious cycle of violence and escalation. The peaceful resolution that might have been possible earlier now seemed a distant hope as the conflict spiraled out of control. The Texas fence-cutting wars were no longer a series of isolated incidents, they had become a full-blown social and economic conflict. The act of cutting barbed wire, while seemingly simple, required a degree of skill and ingenuity. It wasn't simply a matter of using any old tool. The fence cutters developed specialized techniques and tools to efficiently and effectively dismantle the fences. The barbed wire itself, a relatively new invention, presented a unique challenge. Its sharp barbs and strong wire strands demanded careful consideration. Simple wire cutters were often inadequate, and the fence cutters had to adapt and innovate. Many employed specialized tools, often handcrafted, designed to cut through the wire quickly and quietly, minimizing the risk of detection. These tools, passed down through generations of ranchers, became symbols of resistance, testaments to the ingenuity and determination of those fighting to preserve their way of life. Techniques varied, with some focusing on strategic cuts that weakened the fence without completely destroying it, while others employed more aggressive methods aiming for complete dismantling. The choice of method often depended on the specific type of wire, the terrain, and the urgency of the situation. The process was often clandestine, carried out under the cover of darkness, requiring stealth, precision, and a deep understanding of the land. The fence cutters were not merely vandals, they were skilled and resourceful individuals who employed a range of techniques to overcome the challenges posed by the barbed wire. Their methods reflected both their desperation and their determination to resist the forces that were changing their world. The tools they used and the techniques they developed became crucial elements in the ongoing conflict, illustrating the adaptability and resilience of those fighting for their right to graze their cattle on the open range. The ingenuity employed in fence cutting underscored the intensity of the conflict and the determination of those involved. The Texas fence cutting wars were not a bloodless conflict. While often portrayed as a clash of economic interests, the reality was far more brutal. The escalating tensions resulted in injuries and, tragically, deaths. Confrontations between fence cutters and ranch hands, often armed, were frequent, leading to injuries from gunfire and physical altercations. The barbed wire itself, intended to protect property, became a weapon, causing lacerations and serious injuries to those who came into contact with it during raids or retaliatory actions. The human cost of the conflict extended far beyond physical wounds. The constant fear, the uncertainty, and the pervasive violence created a climate of anxiety and mistrust that permeated the entire ranching community. Families lived in fear of nighttime raids or surprise attacks. The economic hardship faced by the smaller ranchers added another layer of suffering, leading to stress, displacement, and broken families. The psychological toll of the conflict was immense, leaving lasting scars on individuals and communities. Beyond the immediate physical and emotional consequences, the conflict had broader societal implications. The violence and unrest undermined the social fabric of rural Texas communities, leading to divisions and long-lasting resentments. The human cost of the fence-cutting wars serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked conflict and the importance of finding peaceful resolutions to disputes. The legacy of this conflict wasn't just about land and property, it was about the human suffering and the lasting impact on the lives of those who lived through it. The stories of those injured, those who lost loved ones, and those who lived in constant fear should serve as a cautionary tale for future generations. The violence underscores the tragic human cost of unresolved conflict. Into this escalating conflict stepped the Texas Rangers, a force synonymous with the Wild West. Their role, however, was far from straightforward. They weren't simply there to enforce the law in a black-and-white manner. Their involvement was far more nuanced, reflecting the complexities of the situation. Charged with maintaining order in a vast and often lawless territory, the Rangers found themselves caught in the middle of a conflict that pitted neighbor against neighbor. Their actions were often shaped by the political landscape and the economic interests of the powerful landowners. While ostensibly tasked with suppressing violence and upholding the law, their interventions were frequently criticized as biased, often favoring the wealthy ranchers who held considerable political influence. This perception of partiality further fueled the resentment among the smaller ranchers, who felt abandoned and betrayed by the very force that was supposed to protect them. The Rangers' role was multifaceted. They attempted to mediate disputes, sometimes successfully calming tensions and brokering agreements between warring factions. However, their efforts at mediation were often overshadowed by their more forceful actions, such as arresting fence cutters and suppressing violent outbreaks. This dual role, mediating and suppressing, added to the complexity of their involvement. The Rangers' actions, though often necessary to maintain a semblance of order, became a significant element in the unfolding drama of the fence-cutting wars, highlighting the challenges of law enforcement in a society grappling with profound social and economic changes. Their legacy remains a subject of debate, a reflection of the intricate and often contradictory dynamics of the conflict itself. The Texas Rangers faced a formidable challenge in trying to control the widespread conflict. The sheer scale of the problem, with fence-cutting incidents occurring across vast distances, made effective policing incredibly difficult. Their strategies involved a combination of proactive patrols, reactive responses to reported incidents, and attempts to identify and arrest key figures involved in the organized raids. However, the vastness of the Texas landscape, coupled with the secretive nature of the fence-cutting operations, often hampered their efforts. Information gathering was crucial, but proving culpability was challenging. Many fence cutters operated under the cover of darkness, making identification and apprehension difficult. The Rangers relied heavily on informants and witnesses, but this information was often unreliable or biased, reflecting the deep divisions within the ranching community. Furthermore, the Rangers faced logistical challenges, including limited resources, manpower shortages, and the difficulty of transporting personnel and supplies across the vast distances involved. Their effectiveness was often hampered by a lack of clear legal guidelines and a confusing web of local laws and customs. The Rangers also encountered significant resistance from the fence cutters themselves, who were often well-armed and fiercely protective of their way of life. Confrontations were common, and the Rangers often found themselves in dangerous and unpredictable situations. Their attempts to control the situation were further complicated by the political pressures and economic interests that influenced their actions. Balancing the need to maintain order with the competing demands of different factions proved to be a near-impossible task, highlighting the inherent challenges of policing a conflict fueled by deeply rooted social and economic inequalities. The Rangers' struggle to effectively manage the situation underscores the complexity of the fence-cutting wars and the limitations of law enforcement in addressing such a deeply entrenched conflict. The Texas fence-cutting wars weren't simply a clash of wills, they were a brutal manifestation of deep-seated economic anxieties. Land scarcity played a pivotal role. As the population grew and the demand for grazing land increased, competition for resources intensified. The introduction of barbed wire allowed wealthy ranchers to consolidate vast tracts of land, effectively locking out smaller operators who relied on the open range for their livelihoods. This created a stark economic inequality, exacerbating existing tensions. Fluctuations in cattle prices further fueled the conflict. Periods of low prices intensified the economic pressure on smaller ranchers, making it harder for them to survive. This economic hardship, coupled with the loss of access to grazing land, pushed many to desperate measures, including fence cutting. The competition for dwindling resources was fierce. Water sources, already scarce in many parts of Texas, became a highly contested commodity. The ability to control access to water became a significant advantage for larger ranchers, further disadvantaging their smaller competitors. The economic disparities created by barbed wire and land consolidation weren't just about survival, they were about the very fabric of the ranching community. The open range represented not only a way of life but also a system of shared resources and mutual dependence. The shift to enclosed ranges shattered this system, creating resentment and mistrust, culminating in the violent conflict that defined the fence-cutting wars. The economic factors, therefore, were not merely a backdrop to the conflict but its very engine, driving the desperation and fueling the violence. The Texas fence-cutting wars weren't just an economic conflict, they were a clash of cultures and lifestyles. Deep social divisions existed between the wealthy ranchers, often absentee landowners managing vast estates, and the smaller ranchers who lived and worked directly on the land. These divisions weren't merely economic, they were fundamental differences in how they viewed the land, their work, and their place in society. The wealthy ranchers, often from established families, saw the land as a commodity, a source of profit to be managed efficiently and maximized for financial gain. Their approach was often impersonal, prioritizing profit over personal connection to the land or the people who worked it. This contrasted sharply with the smaller ranchers, for whom the land was not just a source of income but a way of life, deeply intertwined with their family's history and traditions. For them, the open range represented a shared resource, a communal system of interdependence, and a lifestyle tied to a deep respect for the land and its resources. The introduction of barbed wire symbolized this clash of cultures. It represented not only the end of the open range but also the imposition of a new social order, one where the wealthy landowners held absolute control over access to resources. This sense of dispossession and the erosion of their traditional way of life fueled the resentment and anger that ultimately erupted into violence. The conflict was therefore not just about land and economics, it was about deeply held values, contrasting visions of the future, and the struggle to preserve a fading way of life in the face of relentless economic and social change. The fence-cutting wars reflected a fundamental struggle for identity and belonging within the rapidly changing landscape of Texas. The fence-cutting wars weren't fought by faceless masses, they involved individuals with distinct motivations and roles. While pinpointing every participant is impossible, certain figures stand out, representing the clashing interests at the heart of the conflict. On one side were the powerful ranchers, often wealthy landowners who benefited from the enclosure of the open range. These individuals, often wielding significant political influence, actively defended their property rights and sought to maintain their economic dominance. Their actions, while seen as self-preservation by some, were viewed as oppressive by others. Conversely, the fence cutters themselves were a diverse group. Some were small ranchers driven to desperation by economic hardship and the loss of their traditional livelihoods. Others were cowboys, drifters, or individuals who simply saw an opportunity for rebellion or profit in the chaos. Their motivations ranged from economic survival to a deep-seated resentment towards the wealthy landowners who, in their view, had unjustly seized control of the land. Among these individuals were skilled fence cutters, developing specialized tools and techniques, showcasing ingenuity and resourcefulness. Their actions, though illegal, were seen by some as justified resistance against an unjust system. The Texas Rangers, too, played a crucial role, but their involvement was far from monolithic. Individual rangers held differing views on how to handle the situation, reflecting the conflicting pressures they faced. Their actions at times served to escalate tensions, while other times they attempted to mediate disputes and restore order. Understanding the actions and motivations of these key players is crucial to comprehending the complex dynamics of the Texas fence-cutting wars. Their stories, woven together, illuminate the profound social and economic changes transforming Texas during this turbulent era. The intensity of the fence-cutting wars is perhaps best illustrated by specific incidents, one of which stands out: the Newton County conflict. This event, though not the only one marked by violence, serves as a microcosm of the larger conflict, highlighting its brutal nature and far-reaching consequences. While the exact details vary depending on the source, the core narrative remains consistent: a clash between large landowners determined to protect their property and smaller ranchers fighting to maintain access to grazing land. The conflict in Newton County involved numerous skirmishes, property damage, and ultimately, loss of life. Fence-cutting escalated into armed confrontations, turning the rural landscape into a battleground. The violence wasn't confined to isolated incidents, it permeated the community, creating a climate of fear and distrust that lingered long after the immediate conflict subsided. The Newton County incident underscored the deep-seated resentment and desperation fueling the conflict. It wasn't simply about fences. It was about livelihoods, survival, and the very future of a way of life. The consequences of the Newton County incident extended beyond the immediate participants. It served as a stark reminder of the escalating violence and the potential for further bloodshed. The event highlighted the inability of law enforcement to fully control the situation and the deep divisions within the ranching community. It became a symbol of the larger conflict, demonstrating the devastating impact of the fence-cutting wars and the profound social and economic transformations reshaping Texas. The memory of Newton County served as a potent reminder of the human cost of this often overlooked conflict, shaping the narrative of the fence-cutting wars and its lasting impact on the region. Beyond the violence and skirmishes, the fence-cutting wars played out in the courtrooms of Texas. Legal battles over land ownership and grazing rights became a central feature of the conflict, highlighting the complexities and limitations of the legal system in addressing the underlying issues. These weren't simple cases of trespass, they involved intricate questions of property rights, historical land use, and the very definition of ownership in a rapidly changing landscape. Many cases involved disputes over fence lines, with smaller ranchers challenging the legality of fences erected on land they claimed to have historically used for grazing. The legal system, however, often favored the wealthy landowners who had the resources to navigate the complexities of the court system and employ skilled lawyers. This disparity in resources further exacerbated the existing economic inequalities, leaving smaller ranchers at a distinct disadvantage. The legal battles often dragged on for years, with outcomes that rarely provided lasting solutions or addressed the root causes of the conflict. The legal challenges faced by smaller ranchers reflected a broader struggle against a system that often seemed stacked against them. The legal system, while designed to uphold justice, often became a tool used by the wealthy to maintain their power and control over resources. The complexities of property law, coupled with the economic disparities between the parties involved, created a system where justice was not always equally accessible. The legal battles of the fence-cutting wars therefore serve as a reminder of the limitations of the legal system in resolving deep-seated social and economic conflicts. They represent a crucial aspect of the larger struggle over land, resources, and the very future of ranching in Texas. The violence of the fence-cutting wars didn't end abruptly, it gradually subsided over time, a complex process shaped by a confluence of factors. Increased law enforcement presence, though often biased, played a role in deterring some acts of violence. The Texas Rangers, while facing criticism for their uneven enforcement, did contribute to a reduction in open conflict through a combination of arrests, patrols, and, in some instances, successful mediation efforts. Their presence, however flawed, helped to establish a greater sense of order and predictability, making large-scale raids and open confrontations less feasible. Economic shifts also contributed to the decline in violence. As the ranching industry consolidated, many smaller ranchers were either forced out of business or absorbed into larger operations. This economic restructuring reduced the number of individuals directly impacted by the enclosure of the open range, decreasing the pool of potential participants in the conflict. Furthermore, changing economic conditions led some smaller ranchers to adapt their operations, finding alternative livelihoods or accepting the realities of the changing landscape. Alongside these economic changes, a shift in attitudes also contributed to the easing of tensions. As barbed wire became more widely accepted and the open range became a fading memory, the intensity of resentment began to wane. While the scars of the conflict remained, the shared experience of economic hardship and adaptation helped to foster a sense of common ground amongst ranchers, irrespective of their size or economic standing. The gradual decline of violence was therefore a complex process, a confluence of increased law enforcement, economic shifts, and evolving attitudes. It was a slow, uneven process, but ultimately the open warfare characteristic of the early years of the conflict gradually gave way to a more stable, though still unequal, ranching landscape. The fence-cutting wars left an indelible mark on Texas, reshaping its social fabric, land ownership patterns, and legal frameworks. The conflict profoundly altered the social landscape, leaving behind a legacy of resentment and mistrust that lingered for generations. The stark economic inequalities exposed during the wars contributed to lasting social divisions, impacting community relationships and shaping political discourse for years to come. The memories of violence and injustice became part of the collective memory of Texas, influencing narratives and shaping perspectives on land ownership and the role of government. The wars irrevocably changed land ownership patterns in Texas. The widespread adoption of barbed wire led to the consolidation of land under fewer owners, transforming the open range into a patchwork of fenced-in properties. This shift fundamentally altered the traditional ranching practices and economic structures, benefiting large landowners while displacing smaller ranchers and creating a more stratified agricultural landscape. The legacy of this land consolidation is still evident in the Texas landscape today. Furthermore, the legal battles fought during the fence-cutting wars had a lasting impact on legal frameworks related to property rights and land use. The court's tendency to favor wealthy landowners highlighted weaknesses in the legal system's ability to address economic inequalities and protect the rights of smaller operators. This experience helped to shape future legal interpretations and legislative efforts aimed at balancing the rights of landowners with the needs of the broader community. The fence-cutting wars, therefore, serve as a potent reminder of the complex interplay between social, economic, and legal forces shaping the development of Texas. The fence-cutting wars weren't just about violence, they were a catalyst for profound changes in ranching practices. The open range, a defining feature of Texas ranching for decades, effectively ceased to exist. The widespread adoption of barbed wire, fueled by the conflict, fundamentally altered how ranchers managed their land and their cattle. The free-range system, where cattle roamed vast expanses of unfenced land, gave way to a more controlled and regimented approach. Ranching transitioned from an extensive system, reliant on vast tracts of open land, to a more intensive system characterized by smaller, fenced-in pastures. This shift required significant adaptations in ranching techniques. Ranchers had to develop new strategies for managing their herds within confined spaces, including rotational grazing and improved pasture management. The need for more efficient land use led to innovations in cattle breeding and herd management, focusing on optimizing cattle production within smaller areas. This transformation wasn't uniform. The transition to controlled grazing happened at different paces and in different ways across the state. Larger ranchers with the resources to invest in fencing and infrastructure adapted more quickly. Smaller ranchers, often lacking the capital, faced greater challenges and were frequently forced to adapt or exit the industry altogether. The shift from open range to controlled grazing, therefore, was a complex and uneven process reflecting the broader economic and social changes brought about by the fence-cutting wars. It fundamentally reshaped the very nature of ranching in Texas, leaving a lasting legacy on the industry's practices and the landscape itself. Popular culture often portrays the fence-cutting wars as a romanticized clash between rugged individualists fighting for their way of life against powerful landowners. Images of daring cowboys cutting fences under the moonlight, defying authority and upholding the spirit of the open range are prevalent in many narratives. This romanticized vision, however, often obscures the harsh realities of the conflict. The historical reality was far more complex and often brutal. While the fight for survival and the defense of traditional ways of life were undoubtedly motivating factors for many involved, the conflict was also fueled by economic inequality, land disputes, and violence. The romanticized image often overlooks the significant violence, the lasting trauma inflicted on individuals and communities, and the inherent inequalities that shaped the conflict. It often fails to acknowledge the devastating impact on the lives and livelihoods of many involved, portraying a simplistic narrative that ignores the complex social and economic factors at play. Furthermore, the romanticized view frequently simplifies the roles of various actors, particularly the Texas Rangers. While some rangers attempted mediation, many favored wealthy landowners, contributing to the conflict's escalation and uneven enforcement of the law. The myth often glosses over the biased application of justice and the deep-seated inequalities that fueled the conflict. Therefore, while the spirit of resistance and the fight for survival were undoubtedly significant aspects of the fence-cutting wars, a balanced understanding requires acknowledging the harsh realities, the complexities of motivations, and the lasting societal consequences. The myth, while captivating, needs to be contextualized within the broader historical reality. The fence-cutting wars fundamentally reshaped land ownership in Texas, ushering in an era of more clearly defined property lines. Before the conflict, the open-range system characterized land use with poorly defined boundaries and communal grazing practices. Cattle roamed freely across vast expanses, with property lines often vague and subject to dispute. This system, while fostering a sense of communal resource management, was inherently unstable and prone to conflict as the ranching industry expanded and economic pressures intensified. The introduction of barbed wire and the subsequent wars dramatically altered this landscape. The ability to easily fence land led to a rapid increase in the demarcation of property lines, creating a more fragmented and individually owned land structure. The conflict, while violent and destructive, inadvertently accelerated this process. The legal battles that accompanied the wars forced courts to grapple with increasingly complex property disputes, leading to more precise legal definitions of land ownership and boundaries. This led to a gradual shift from a system based on implied rights and communal access to one characterized by clearly defined individual property rights, enforced through fencing and legal mechanisms. This transformation had profound implications for the ranching industry and the social fabric of Texas. While it provided greater certainty for landowners, it also contributed to the displacement of smaller ranchers who lacked the resources to acquire and fence larger tracts of land. The shift towards more defined property lines, therefore, was a complex process with both positive and negative consequences, shaping the economic and social landscape of Texas for generations to come. The legacy of this transformation remains a defining feature of Texas land ownership to this day. The fence-cutting wars continue to resonate in Texas culture, serving as an enduring symbol of conflict, change, and the struggle for survival. The conflict's legacy transcends historical accounts, weaving its way into the state's literature, folklore, and collective memory. Stories of fence cutters, often portrayed as heroic figures defying powerful interests, are passed down through generations, shaping narratives about resistance and the preservation of traditional ways of life. These narratives, while sometimes romanticized, reflect the enduring appeal of the underdog story and the enduring power of collective memory. The war's symbolism is further explored in Texas literature, where the conflict serves as a backdrop for exploring themes of land ownership, economic inequality, and the clash between tradition and progress. Authors have mined the rich historical context of the wars to create compelling narratives that explore the human cost of conflict and the complexities of social and economic change. These literary works offer a nuanced perspective, often going beyond the simplified narratives found in popular culture and delving into the multifaceted experiences of those involved. Furthermore, the imagery associated with the wars, barbed wire, fences, and the vast Texas landscape has become deeply ingrained in the state's visual and cultural identity. These images evoke a sense of both progress and conflict, reflecting the complex legacy of the period. The enduring symbolism of the fence-cutting wars, therefore, serves as a potent reminder of the transformative events that shaped Texas's identity and its ongoing struggle to balance economic growth with the preservation of its cultural heritage. It's a legacy that continues to inspire debate, reflection, and creative expression. The Texas fence-cutting wars offer a stark reminder of the consequences of unresolved conflict and the critical importance of fair and equitable resource management. The wars highlight the dangers of ignoring economic disparities and the devastating impact of biased law enforcement. The failure to address the underlying economic inequalities and the uneven application of justice fueled the conflict, resulting in years of violence and lasting social divisions. The experience underscores the need for proactive measures to address economic imbalances and ensure that all stakeholders have a voice in resource allocation. The conflict also demonstrates the limitations of relying solely on forceful law enforcement to resolve complex social and economic issues. While the Texas Rangers played a role in attempting to quell the violence, their actions were often inconsistent and biased, exacerbating tensions rather than resolving them. This highlights the necessity of a multifaceted approach to conflict resolution, incorporating negotiation, mediation, and a commitment to fairness and transparency. Effective conflict resolution requires addressing the root causes of conflict rather than simply suppressing its symptoms. Looking back, the fence-cutting wars offer valuable lessons for contemporary society. They remind us of the importance of inclusive dialogue, equitable resource distribution, and impartial justice systems. Addressing economic inequalities, fostering open communication, and establishing mechanisms for fair conflict resolution are essential to preventing similar conflicts from arising in the future. The legacy of the fence-cutting wars serves as a cautionary tale, highlighting the profound costs of neglecting these critical principles in managing shared resources and resolving societal disputes. The path towards peace and prosperity requires a commitment to fairness, understanding, and proactive conflict resolution strategies. The fence-cutting wars, with their dramatic clashes and compelling characters, have provided fertile ground for storytelling in various forms of popular culture. While the historical accuracy of these portrayals varies, they offer glimpses into the public imagination's engagement with this significant chapter in Texas history. Often, the narrative focuses on the romanticized aspects of the conflict, emphasizing the heroism of the fence cutters and the struggle against powerful landowners. Books, for instance, have explored the conflict from various perspectives, some focusing on the individual struggles of ranchers caught in the crossfire, others highlighting the broader social and economic forces at play. These literary works often delve into the moral ambiguities of the conflict, showcasing the complexities of the characters and their motivations. The romanticized versions often portray the fence cutters as valiant defenders of the open range, while more nuanced accounts explore the violence and the social inequalities at the heart of the conflict. Films and television series have also capitalized on the dramatic potential of the fence-cutting wars. These visual media often emphasize the action and adventure aspects of the story, depicting thrilling scenes of fence cutting and confrontations with the Texas Rangers. However, these portrayals frequently simplify the historical context and often overlook the underlying economic and social factors that fueled the conflict. As a result, while providing entertaining narratives, they may not always accurately reflect the complexities of the historical events. Despite these variations, the consistent presence of the fence-cutting wars in popular culture underscores the enduring fascination with this pivotal moment in Texas history. It is a fascinating subject ripe for storytelling and reinterpretation. The Texas fence-cutting wars represent a pivotal chapter in the state's history, a period of profound transformation marked by violence, social upheaval, and lasting consequences. The conflict's roots lie in the clash between traditional open-range ranching and the emerging system of enclosed, individually owned land. This clash was fueled by economic inequalities, exacerbated by the introduction of barbed wire, and further complicated by the uneven application of justice. The wars resulted in a decisive shift in land ownership, fundamentally altering the Texas landscape and its social fabric. The conflict underscores the critical importance of addressing economic disparities and ensuring equitable access to resources. The biased enforcement of laws favoring powerful landowners only inflamed tensions and prolonged the violence. The wars serve as a cautionary tale, highlighting the dangers of ignoring social and economic inequalities and the need for just and fair resource management. The transition from the open range to a system of fenced properties was not merely a technological shift, it was a social and economic revolution with far-reaching implications. Ultimately, the fence-cutting wars left a complex legacy. While they brought an end to the open-range system, they also exposed the limitations of the legal system and the enduring challenges of achieving social and economic justice. The conflict's enduring symbolism in Texas culture reflects the lasting impact of this transformative period, reminding us of the ongoing struggle to balance progress with equity and fairness. Understanding this conflict allows us to appreciate the multifaceted nature of Texas history and the enduring challenges of resource management and social justice. The echoes of these wars continue to shape the state's identity, reminding us of the importance of learning from the past to build a more equitable future. The echoes of the Texas fence-cutting wars resonate far beyond the 1880s, offering valuable insights into contemporary land use conflicts. The fundamental issues at play, the clash between competing interests, the struggle for access to resources, and the role of law enforcement, remain relevant in today's world. While the specific context has changed, the underlying tensions persist. We continue to grapple with questions of equitable access to land, the balance between individual property rights and communal needs, and the potential for violence when these issues remain unresolved. The fence-cutting wars serve as a stark reminder of the potential consequences when economic inequalities are ignored and when the legal system fails to provide fair and impartial justice. The history of the wars highlights the importance of proactive measures to address these imbalances and prevent similar conflicts from escalating. Understanding the historical context of these conflicts can inform current debates surrounding land use, resource management, and environmental protection. The lessons learned from the fence-cutting wars emphasize the need for inclusive dialogue, equitable resource distribution, and transparent decision-making processes in managing land and other shared resources. These lessons are crucial not only for resolving contemporary land use disputes but also for fostering a more just and sustainable future. The history of the fence-cutting wars serves as a powerful reminder that neglecting these principles can lead to protracted conflict and social unrest. By studying the past, we can gain valuable insights and tools to address the challenges of the present and build a more equitable and sustainable future for all. The echoes of these conflicts urge us towards a more thoughtful and just approach to land management and conflict resolution.